What's the most unexpectedly profound piece of advice you've ever received? Advice 1. My therapist saw through my bullshit that I had convinced myself of. I would let relatively minor things fuck up my entire day/week. In session one day, I was expressing that my day had sucked and whatnot, and he asked me, "Did you have a bad day, or did you have a bad 5 minutes, and then let that ruin an otherwise ok day?" Obviously, it wasn't some aha moment that instantly changed all of my thought processes, but it was something that he and I worked on over months towards letting that question be one of the first things I asked myself when something happens. Advice 2. I asked a weightlifter, Olympic weightlifting, acquaintance of mine, "How did you get so strong?" And he simply said, "Just show up and do the best you can every day." Now this doesn't seem like much, but he had a really low IQ and was coached and handled by excellent coaches, and when he said this I could see something special about the words coming from him. Now I try to show up and do the best I can every day. I remember it a dozen years later. Advice 3. Someone's illness isn't their fault, but it is their responsibility. Also, from the same person, you can be sick and still be an asshole. My ex-husband got diagnosed with a chronic illness shortly after we got married. He couldn't cope and pushed everyone out, including me. For a long time, I was excusing his behavior by saying, "But it's because he's sick," and blaming myself for thinking I was doing something wrong. We had been going to couples therapy since his diagnosis, and the therapist wasn't very good. My ex was also lying, I later found out, about a bunch of stuff. The whole thing was a disaster. I was at some social event and ran into a tarot reader of all people. Their day job was as a death doula, kind of like a grief counselor, and they also happened to have a chronic illness. I explained my situation, and those were the quotes they gave me. It changed my life. I was really struggling with grief and my ex's actions, and in 1 hour that tarot reader gave me better advice and guidance than the years of therapy I'd been in since my ex kicked me out of the house. Advice 4. When I was an undergrad, I was to present my research to a group of benefactors to our university. A couple undergraduates were selected for the opportunity, and I was terrified of looking like a total idiot in front of these rich people that wanted to give my PI money, and almost flaked out. A grad student in my lab pulled me to the side right before the presentation and said, "Just act like you're confident until you actually are." That statement caused a major paradigm shift in my life, and I live it to this day. Every time I've been nervous to do something that I haven't done before, I play a character that has done it a million times and thinks it's no big deal at all. Eventually, I start to believe my own shit and instill actual confidence in myself. No one knows what they're doing until they do. Advice 5. Not quite advice. More like life wisdom from an unexpected place. I was reading some tech support horror stories for commiseration when I was working for a company doing phone-based tech support for cell phones. One of the posters remarked how he worked with someone who had ended up having a tech support-related issue with every single piece of equipment he ever used, which often caused him to spend a lot of time and emotional energy working on fixing the problems, while another long-term coworker never had a single issue with the same exact equipment he was issued. They were both competent and experienced professionals in the field, so it wasn't a matter of not understanding the tech. It's that one of them constantly seemed to run into problems that the other didn't. There was something I weirdly gleaned from the story about how much control we end up having over our own outcomes. The guy who was constantly frustrated by his equipment wasn't issued worse equipment than the other coworker, which meant that when it came to his ongoing struggles, he was largely the cause of his own frustration. It's a lesson I broadened and made me think of examples of my own bad luck that were really some innate things I needed to work on myself. The coworker with the constantly malfunctioning equipment might have benefited from working on his patience, discipline, and introspection about why he was constantly having tech issues. The issues were never with the equipment, they were with the way he approached using it and troubleshooting. Advice 6. I worked at a place where bands practiced. Most of them were irregular about it, showed up late, showed up drunk, argued or bullshitted, or otherwise wasted time, screwed around. You get the picture. But one band always showed up on time, sober, and didn't waste time. They were easily the most serious about practicing. And they sucked. They never got better. This posed a mystery to me, which I put to someone smarter than me, and he told me, some people practice and get better, and some people practice and get better at being bad. It was a profound lesson for me. Practice alone is worthless if you're not constantly striving for improvement. In fact, practice by itself can be bad for you by reinforcing bad habits you already have. That move you have poorly learned, instrument fingering, martial strike, whatever, you'll build in reliable muscle memory for. Now you'll do it poorly every time. Practice is only worthwhile if you're constantly monitoring your performance, identifying problem areas, and working to improve them. And the same is true in every aspect of our lives. Everything we do, we can do better if we make the effort. Advice 7. My first day working in homeless services, Adult Protective Services, came down to my office furious that one of my clients had mentioned their suicidal ideation in a community-based setting. Furious because they now had to follow up on what they felt was a waste of their time. They told me to go talk to the guy, make it go away. Turns out he moved into the building recently and, like most formerly homeless people, has been a part of all sorts of different systems: jails, hospitals, mental health, foster care, his whole life. We chat. I ask about his mental state. He says he isn't really suicidal, but shares that is how you get things. That's how you get folks to respond to you and help you. I tell him I'll help him get what he wants. Turns out he wants Meals on Wheels and in-home supportive services, essentially free food and free cleaning for his room. I spent the next couple months advocating like hell and got both. I made a promise. I was committed to following through on it. So one day I'm walking into work early, dawn-ish, and I see him digging through the trash outside the police station. The police know arresting the homeless and low income for petty crimes won't go anywhere, so, to deter them from going places that might disturb tourists or citizens, the police take everything they have on them: drugs, IDs, to make it harder to access services, cell phones, etc. And those items all end up in the dumpster outside the police station. So if you got the balls to go dumpster diving, you can come up with plenty of drugs and stolen goods to then resell to the neighborhood. I say to my client, I worked my ass off to get you services, so you don't have to do this anymore. Why are you out here living the life? He says, this is who I've been my whole life. It's all I know. I'm a hustler. Even if I don't need to, I still have to. I think about that every day, especially now that I'm in a different environment, not providing services, and spending time more with privileged people from privileged backgrounds. It's a universal truism. Advice 8. I used to go to the bar and cry a lot. I had lots to cry about. My life sucked. I didn't have a way out of my problems, but was too much of a bitch to just flip the switch off. One day a friend of mine met me at the bar and gave me a really solid lecture about how rude it is to be a Debbie Downer in public spaces. Basically, whenever you're in a public space looking sad and acting like you're over it, you are being an energy vampire. You have no idea what anyone else using that space is going through. Someone may have just gotten divorced, fired, found out they had cancer, are losing their house, their dog died. The list goes on. Some people go out to a bar, or a reunion, or a work social, or something to escape their own reality, so they can deal with their emotions quietly/privately. Showing up looking like an emo kid in a space that's democratic is saying to people who are going through something that their problems don't matter as much as yours. If you're a sad bitch, stay home, get a therapist, and return to social functions when you learn how to keep your shit together. That changed my life. I still deal with depression, but I deal with it privately or with my friends. I now see that it's really fucked yo and selfish to go out partying and act like the world is on my shoulders. I have no idea what the person next to me is dealing with, and me being gloomy may make them feel even worse. Their kid could have leukemia, and here I am sad 'cause I can't pay my bills. not to weigh one issue against the other. But if you're going out, leave your shit at the door. Advice 9. A few from my dad, actually. 1. Don't ever let anyone tell you how to grieve. He lost his mom when he was 15. And he had an understandably hard time dealing with that for a long time. When I lose someone, I tend to go numb for a while, and I used to think there was something wrong with me. But my dad helped me understand that everyone grieves differently, and there is no right timeline for it. 2. You can't have everything in life, but you can have what you want the most. In other words, you need to decide what's most important to you and focus on that. 3. You never know what goes on behind closed doors. In other words, you can never truly know someone unless you share a home and life with them. It's a bit cynical, but it's definitely proven true in my experience. Advice 10. There was this girl that I had the hots for whose life was a mess. I don't want to go into details, but she was dealing with a lot: drugs, relationship issues, family issues, just something you don't want to touch with a stolen dick. Anyway, I was texting her with a group of friends around who were trying to tell me exactly how much I wanted to stay away from this level of drama. Finally, one friend told me, "Dude, you can't save her." And it hit me like a ton of bricks. Apparently, I had a habit of trying to rescue the princess. Now, I didn't take his advice and paid for it, but I learned something. Advice 11. So one day I was driving home tired into the sun, ran a red light, and didn't even see it until I looked in the rearview mirror and saw that there was a red light. I drove a few more miles to get to the store and was buying a few things before I went home, and a man without a shopping cart walked through the store, tall, thin, wearing unseasonably warm clothes. This phoenix in the summer starts talking to me. He says, once you get out into the intersection, you own anything that happens. I literally looked back to see if he was talking to me or someone behind me. When I looked back, he was gone. Don't know how he could have known where I was or who I was. I have dark tinted windows, and one was behind me, and I'd never seen him since. I'm very careful when the sun goes down in my eyes now.